Hey everyone, welcome to our step-by-step guide on solving fractions. Fractions can seem a little intimidating at first, but trust me, they're not that scary once you get to know them. Today, we'll break down 10 essential methods to help you master fractions with ease. We'll take it slow, practice together, and by the end of this video, you'll be able to tackle any fraction problem with confidence. So, let's get started. Let's start with the basics. What is a fraction anyway? Well, imagine you have a delicious pie cut into equal slices. A fraction represents a part or parts of that whole pie. The bottom number, called the denominator, tells us how many equal slices the pie is cut into. The top number, the numerator, tells us how many of those slices we're talking about. For example, if we have a pie cut into 8 slices and we take 3 of them, we represent that as the fraction 3/8. The fraction 3/8 literally means 3 out of 8 equal parts, see? Not so scary after all. Sometimes we encounter fractions that are a bit cluttered. That's where simplifying comes in. Simplifying a fraction means finding an equivalent fraction with smaller numbers. It's like finding a more elegant way to express the same thing. To simplify a fraction, we need to find a common factor, a number that divides both the numerator and denominator evenly. For example, in the fraction 4/6, both 4 and 6 can be divided by 2. When we divide both by 2, we get the simplified fraction 2/3. Notice that 2/3 represents the same portion as 4/6, just with smaller numbers. It's like cleaning up your room. Everything is the same, just neater and easier to manage. Now let's talk about common denominators. A common denominator is essential when we want to add or subtract fractions. Think of it like this. You can't add apples and oranges directly, right? You need a common unit like pieces of fruit. Similarly, to add or subtract fractions, we need a common denominator. Finding a common denominator is like finding a common language for our fractions. The least common denominator, LCD, is the smallest common multiple of the denominators. Once we have the LCD, we adjust the numerators accordingly to get equivalent fractions with the same denominator. Chapter 4. Adding fractions with the same denominator. Easy peasy. Adding fractions with the same denominator is a piece of cake. Since the denominators are already the same, we just need to add the numerators. For example, let's add 1/4 plus 2/4. The denominator stays the same, which is 4, and we add the numerators, 1 plus 2 equals 3. So, 1/4 plus 2/4 equals 3/4. It's like adding apples to apples. You just count the total number of apples. Chapter 5. Adding fractions with different denominators. A bit trickier, but we've got this. Adding fractions with different denominators requires a bit more work, but it's totally doable. Remember our common denominator discussion? This is where it comes in handy. First, we find the least common denominator, or LCD, of the fractions we want to add. Next, we convert each fraction to an equivalent fraction with the LCD as the denominator. Now that our fractions have the same denominator, we can simply add the numerators like we did before. Chapter 6. Subtracting fractions with the same denominator. Just like adding, but in reverse. Subtracting fractions with the same denominator is very similar to adding them. Since the denominators are the same, we simply subtract the numerators. For instance, let's subtract 3/5 minus 1/5. The denominator remains the same, which is 5, and we subtract the numerators. 3 minus 1 equals 2. Therefore, 3/5 minus 1/5 equals 2/5. Think of it like subtracting apples from apples. You're just finding the difference in the number of apples. Just like with addition, subtracting fractions with different denominators requires finding a common denominator. First, we find the least common denominator of the fractions we want to subtract. Then, we convert each fraction to an equivalent fraction with the least common denominator as the denominator. Now that our fractions have the same denominator, we can subtract the numerators. Finally, we simplify the result if possible. Multiplying fractions is actually quite simple. Unlike addition and subtraction, we don't need to worry about common denominators here. To multiply fractions, we simply multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators. For example, let's multiply 2/3 by 1/4. We multiply the numerators. 2 times 1 equals 2. We multiply the denominators. 3 times 4 equals 12. So, 2/3 times 1/4 equals 2/12. And of course, we always simplify our answer if possible. In this case, 2/12 simplifies to 1/6. Dividing fractions might seem a bit tricky at first, but there's a handy trick to make it easy. Keep, change, flip. First, we keep the first fraction as it is. Then, we change the division sign to a multiplication sign. Finally, we flip the second fraction. That is, we swap the numerator and denominator. Now, we have a simple multiplication problem, which we already know how to solve. We multiply the numerators and multiply the denominators just like we learned in the previous chapter. Sometimes we encounter fractions where the numerator is greater than or equal to the denominator. These are called improper fractions. We can convert improper fractions to mixed numbers, which are a combination of a whole number and a proper fraction. To do this, we divide the numerator by the denominator. The quotient becomes the whole number part of the mixed number, the remainder becomes the numerator of the proper fraction, and the denominator stays the same. And there you have it. 10 simple steps to solve fractions. Remember, practice makes perfect. The more you work with fractions, the more confident you'll become. Practice these methods, and soon you'll be a fractions pro. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more educational content. Keep those brains buzzing, and I'll see you in the next video.